Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Yud Aleph. It's the daf of Shabbat. We're going to get started at the very top of our daf with the word Tanya, and we're going to end the whole section on the tzedakah sugiyot and get back to our topic of separating courtyards and sharing of courtyards. Tanya, Amru alav Binyamin the Tzadik, shaya memuna al kupash shel tzedakah. So Binyamin the righteous was in charge of all the charity in the city. Pam achat bata isha lefanav b'shnei batzoret. A woman came before him when there was a time of famine or a drought. Amra la Rebbe parnaseni. She said, please help support me. Amar la avodah. But I swear, she'em kupash shel tzedakah klum. What can I do? There's nothing left in the kupav tzedakah. So Amra lo, she says, Rebbe, if you don't support me, me and my 7 children are going to die. Amadu parnasami shelo. So he went, he took his own personal money, and he supported her. Liyamim chalav v'natal lamud. Time went on, and he got sick and was about to die. The angels came, said to God, Ribbono shel olam, ata amarta kol hamakem nefesh achat miYisrael ki'ilu kiyem olam malei. You said that anybody who sustains one life in the Jewish people, right? Well, it's as if he sustained the entire world. Binyamin the Tzadik, and this Binyamin the Tzadik, who sustained this woman and her 7 children, is now going to die at a young age. Miyad karulog sartino. They ripped up the decree to kill him. Tana, and the Braita even says, he got 22 years. Some people try to make significance of the calculation. Why specifically 22? But the main point being, he gained extra years in his life for sustaining and giving charity to this woman to help her and her family to keep alive. Tanu Rabbanan, another story. Maaseh b'Munbaz hamelech. Okay, Munbaz, according to the Koran, I'll summarize a little bit about what the Koran says about him. He was the king of Yabin, which was from the end of the Second Temple time period. So it's independent kingdom in the Parthian Empire. And his mother, so first of all, some of the people from this area helped join the Jews in their revolt against the Romans. And his mother, Queen Helene Amalka, ends up converting to Judaism and kept the mitzvah very well. And basically, they say he's buried in the tomb of the kings of Jerusalem, and most of this information comes from Josephus. Okay, so this is Munbaz hamelech. His name ends with Baz, which is going to be connected to the story. So what do we know about him in this story? Usually bizbez means he wasted. Now it's called wasted here because he wasted it in the eyes of his family, but really he didn't waste it at all. And we're going to see, what did he do? He took all the otzarot, the treasures he had, and the ones from his fathers, and in a time of a drought, and he gave it all to charity. Okay, he helped support tons of people in his community. That's why, and perhaps it must be also he supported Jews. So now, what happens? So his family all went against him and said, your fathers collected all this stuff, saved it over all these years, and each one added to the collection of the previous. Nobody gave it away. And you're just wasting it? Obviously, it wasn't really wasting, and that's what he's going to claim. Amar lahem, and he's going to give them a series of statements about how great it is what I did compared to what you have done all these years. They stored it down below, but I stored it up in the heavens. That when the emet, when truth comes from the land and grows from below, the tzedek mishamayim, the righteousness for the heavens, will be nishkaf, will be reflected. In other words, what I'm doing is going to have its reflections in the shamayim. They're going to reflect down on me, and I will gain benefit from that. You saved in a place, right? You and all the fathers saved in a place where anything could happen to it. It could get a fire, could be lit, and the whole thing will burn. And there's no knowing what will happen. It could be eaten by animals. And I stored it in a place where nothing can happen to it. It will be, right? My rewards will be stored in Olam Haba, in the world to come. Again, he quotes Pasuk, Tzedek u'mishpat. These are Pasukim off from Tehillim right now. Then we'll get to some others. Tzedek u'mishpat v'chom kisecha. Right, that tzedek and mishpat are the dwelling places, right? It's not in this world, right? It's tzedek and mishpat is the seat of God. And My father stored up something which there was no investment in it. They just stored it, but it wasn't going to grow at all. And I saved something that is going to have an investment. Right? If they say to a tzaddik, this pasuk from Mishayahu, it's good. Why is it good? Because they're going to enjoy the fruits of their actions. They saved up money, I saved up lives, because I saved all these people's lives. The beginning of this part is the important part, which is the pri of a tzaddik is eitz chayim. He brings life to the world. His peirot, what he gives is life. They save for others, but I save for myself. And they each save for their child, and the next one saved for the other child. I saved up something that was for me. When you give charity, in the end, it's good for you, right? The righteousness will go to the person who gave. They saved up in this world, and I saved up for the world to come. Okay, the tzedakah that you do, the righteous deeds that you do, will God, right? The kavod Hashem will gather you, okay? And that is something for the world to come. Okay, that's the end of this whole very interesting tzedakah section about all the virtues of giving charity. Now we're going to go back to the Mishnah, and at the very end of the Mishnah, it said, "In kanaba beitira hareyu ka'anshe ha'ir." Okay, so this was the Mishnah. Back to where it was for a minute on Daf Zayin and Bet, and it said the question was how much you have to be in the city that you're considered as inhabitants of the city that you have to give to all the, you have to give money to the needs of the city. And then we said, Yud Bech Chodesh, okay, 12 months. But then, Kanaba Beitira, but if you bought a place to dwell in, Hareyu Kanshe Ha'ir Miyad, then you immediately become like inhabitants of the city and have to help with the costs. So now we say, Matnitin de lo Rashbag, Detanya Rashbag, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, in Kanaba Kalka Koshu Hareyu Kanshe Ha'ir. As soon as you buy any bit of land, you're already considered like the people of the city. So that means not 12 months, right? And not a Beit Dirah, but just any bit of land. So it seems to be our Mishnah doesn't match Rashban. But then the Gemara says, but what do you mean? Ha Tanya, it says in a bright. Only if you bought land that you could build a house on, not land that was too small to build a house on. So what do they answer, right? That seems to contradict what we just saw Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel say, to which they answered, Trei Tanai V'Alibador Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. There's two different Tanaitic opinions about what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion was, and therefore, again, our Mishnah theoretically might go against Rashbag, or it might actually go together with Rashbag, depending on what we say Rashbag actually said. The next Mishnah is going to discuss dividing up of courtyards and other spaces, and at what size can we insist one neighbor insists that the other one, right? If they both share a space, one partner can say, we're dividing this up and making a separation agreement. We can't divide up a courtyard unless there's 4 cubits by 4 cubits for each one. Okay, so everybody gets 4 cubits by 4 cubits. Any less than that, it's not enough of a space to say we need to divide it. Below Tasadeh, if it's a field, we always measure fields in how many crops can grow in this area. So they measure it an area that you could grow 9 kav of produce. And this is basically going to be, this is a space that's approximately, okay, nowadays it's 950 to 1,400 square meters. It's a range because we never really know how these amounts exactly work out. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ad sheyeh bat tishat chatzei kabim l'zeh v'tishat chatzei kabim l'zeh, 9 half kafs for each one, which means basically we're going to say half the amount we just said. Okay, so the amount I said was 950 to 1,400 square meters is the minimum size for each one. Okay, and then half of that if you hold by Rabbi Yehuda. Below it hagina, if you have a garden, it's usually much smaller. So here we have a much smaller amount that you could plant for your garden, and we have a machloket. Half a cup for each, okay, which is approximately 50 to 80 square meters. Rabbi Akiva Omer Beit Rova, he says a quarter, which is half that amount, 25 to 40. Now we're going to talk about a hall, which they don't mean like a hallway, but if you look at the Koran, today in general, they have very good pictures. Even the Schottenstein has a few photos that might help you along the way. But a traklin, if you look at the photo in the Koran, it shows a room that can hold 3 couches and a sitting area, basically. So if we have a traklin, Veloat HaMoran, we're now going to have all different things about these things. We'll see in a minute what the halacha is. Moran is like a drawing room, some other kind of room. Veloat HaShopach, a dovecote, which is also a picture in the Koran. Loat HaTallit, a garment. Loat HaMerchatz, a bathhouse. Loat Beit Habad, the place, the olive press. Veloat Beit HaShlachim, which is a field that is irrigated, meaning it has a stream going through it or overflowing into it. There has to be enough for each one. Okay, this doesn't fit in with the measurements as before. This is, if it's not enough for each one to do anything with, then we determine it based on its value by itself. Okay, and here's the rule. Okay, so we don't really understand what this kedei lezeh is. If you would split it and it would still retain its original name. Like if you have half a bathhouse, you might not be able to call that a bathhouse anymore. But if it was big enough, they had enough rooms to be able to split it and have each one be called a bathhouse or a tallit. If you cut it in half, and we no longer call it a tallit because it's not really such a garment that's usable anymore. But if you could split it and it would still retain, both halves would retain their original name, cholkim, being lav and cholkim. Okay, and if not, you can't insist the other divided. Matai, when does this all hold true? Bisman she'en shnehem rotzim. This is, by the way, if they don't both want it. Aval bisman she'en rotzim, but if they both want to divide it anyway and they don't care, well, then of course they can agree and they can divide it, other than one exception to the rule. What's that? Kitvei kodesh. If you have like a chumash, let's say, and you want to cut it in half, well, even if both want it, you can't, because that's disrespectful to the kitvei kodesh. Now the Gemara is going to start with Amar Rabbi Asi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Arba amot sha'amru chutz mishal ptachim. The 4 amot that we're just talking about doesn't include the entrance area outside your house. In other words, the house opens up to a courtyard. So if there's 4 cubits by 4 cubits for each person, but that we deduct before we say, are there 4 cubits for each side? We take away 4 cubits in front of the house, because there's an assumption that when you bring things into your house, okay, let's say they would carry something on a donkey. So you would need the donkey to kind of be parked outside your house, kind of like nowadays we would have a garage, right? A parking space, which would be your own private parking space. That's basically what we're saying. We need a space where you could park your animal and then unload all your stuff that's on the animal. So that is considered part of your house. And after that, we start talking about how much room there is in the chatzer. So we deduct that value before we start dividing. Tanya Namihach, here's a bright to strengthen this. A different source says 8 for each. Hanantna. But don't we have a Mishnah that says Arba Amot Lezeh, Arba Amot Lezeh? That's our Mishnah. How do we reconcile that? Ela Shmamina Ked Rabbi Asi Shmamina. So it must be 8 for each, because you have to deduct 4 from that for the entrance area, and then you're left with another 4 to be divided. Right? In other words, again, if it's 8 by 8, then that's 8 for each, and each one minus 4, and then each one is 4. The Ika de Ramile, remember, there's another way this sugya came about, which is that they started with a contradiction. And they said, we're going to get to the same conclusion. It just started in a different way. It didn't start with Rabbi Yochanan's statement that was quoted by Rabbi Asi. It started with pointing out that there was a contradiction. And then they said, V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Shmona amot lezeh v'shmona amot lezeh, 8 for this and 8 for that. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. In order to reconcile the contradiction, he said, Arba amot she'amru chutz mishal ptachim. This is not including the entrance, and therefore one source was talking about including the entrances, and one was without already, with the entrances deducted, and that's why really they're one and the same. Again, in the end, Rabbi Asi says the same thing in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. It's just, did he say it? And then we question from the Mishnah. Well, from our Mishnah, and again, the Mishnah and the Braita, or was it that we started with contradiction and his statement was used to reconcile? Amar Rav Huna, Chatzir mitchaleket lefi ptacheh. Now we're going to learn that if you had a house, and we're going to have a machlok at Rav Huna and Rav Chisda about this, you had 2 houses in a courtyard. Again, you have to remember from Masechet Eruvin the way we learned about courtyards. we have a bunch of houses that open into a common courtyard, which then those open into a mavoi, which is an alleyway, which then leads to the public domain. So we have a shared courtyard. That's what we're discussing. A few houses open up into it. Well, we divide it. Each one gets a space based on how many exits they have from their house, how many doors open into the courtyard. So if I have 2 doors and you have 1, I'm going to get 2/3 of the space and you're going to get only 1/3. That's Rav Huna. Rav Chisda amar notnim 400 l'chol petach u'petach v'ash'ar cholkim b'shaveh. He says, wait, each entrance gets the 4 cubits that we know. So let's say there's 20. We would deduct 8 from me and we would deduct 4 from you because you only have 1 entrance. I have 2. So we need space in front of each of my entrances. So that gets us down from 20 to what did I say? Right. 20 minus 12 will get down to 8. And then there's 8 to divide up and you're going to get 4 and I'm going to get 4. Okay, so 20 was the magic number. It would have to be 20 minus 4, 4, and 4. And then we're left with 12. And then, then we deduct 12. We're left with 8, 4, and 4 each of us. Okay, so that would be what, so in the end, the courtyard split evenly. It's just that I get a little extra for my courtyard, for, the space in front of my house, I mean. But according to the other opinion, it would be divided, right? 2/3, 1/3. Okay, now, so that would be, right, let's say according to that, it would be, right, so you would deduct the 12 and then the 8 would be divided 2/3, 1/3. Okay, and it could be, I didn't check this out, it's a good question. What if we do 2/3, 1/3 with the 8, you don't even have 4 cubits, so I would assume we wouldn't even be able to, I couldn't force you to split in that case because you don't even end up with 4 cubits. So it would have to be a larger amount for that to work in his case. Okay, and again, then 2/3 would go to me and only 1/3 would go to you. That's Rav Huna. Whereas Rav Chisda said we split it evenly, just deduct. I end up with a little more deducted because I have 2 entranceways. So now we're going to see who we have sources to support. Tanya Kavat, which opinion our sources support? Tanya Kavatei de Rav Chisda. Here's a braita to support Rav Chisda that we actually split it evenly, just deduct first the entrances. Tachim shebachatzer yeshlan 4 amot. Okay, so again, what does this mean? Every entranceway gets 4 cubits. But if you have 1 entrance, or you have 1 and I have 2, okay, so again, right, it's going to be divided 1/3, 2/3, and then and the rest, each of us is going to get the space in front of our entranceway, and the rest is going to be divided 50-50. What if I had an entranceway that was 8 amot wide, or long, I would say. So I get 8 cubits wide of an entrance area and 4 cubits into the chatzer, meaning I get a space of 8x4. Instead of, right, if I had an entrance that was 4 cubits, I would get 4x4. The entrance space is 8 cubits, I get an 8x4 space. Again, that's mine before we even start dividing up the courtyard. So zesh the 4 amot b'chatzer. So, and then I get 4 amot b'chatzer. So now they say, what do you mean? 4 amot b'chatzer might be the type. What are you doing with the 4 in the chatzer? What are we talking about? So Amar Abai Hachi Kamar. What it meant is Notel Shmona Amot, and the truth is I already kind of explained it the way they said this. What they said is, why do I get Shmona Amot against the petach and 4 in the chatzer? That doesn't really make sense, but they're going to explain it the way I already did, which is, Abai says, Notel Shmona Amot ba'orech hachatzer, 4 us 8 amot, the length of the courtyard, meaning the length of my entranceway, and 4 amot b'rochav hachatzer, 4 into the width of the courtyard, and that's what we mean, which is really the way I explained. Amar Meimar now gives an example. Hi peri de souffle, okay, which is, Rashi says it's a chapira in the chatzer. It's a hole dug in the ground where you would put date pits for the animals to eat. Yesh lo 4 amot lechol ruach beruach. If I have this area in the middle of the courtyard that's mine, so I get 4 cubits all around because there we need space for me to walk, to put them in, and for the animals to go around to eat. So I get that whole, I get 4 cubits in every direction. That's if it's open on all four sides. I don't have a unique entranceway. But if I had a special entranceway, meaning it was closed on three sides and I only was open on one side or open on two sides, then I'm only going to get 4 cubits on that side, because obviously no animals or owners are going to go around the side where it's closed. If I have a portico in front of my house, and there's a big debate, you can look at the Torah, there's nice pictures of 3 different opinions about whether this has some walls but open on one side, or no walls, or just like a sukkah type thing where it just has beams, but actually a sukkah, let's say, without walls. Bit of a debate about what this is, but some sort of somewhat open area in front of the house, like a covered porch area. I don't get 4 amot. Tamamai, what's the reason? Mishum peruk masao. But the whole reason that you need the 4 cubits is in order to unload the animals. But since you have this outside space where your animal could go in, they didn't bring the animals into the house, but you would put the animal in the portico. So therefore, you have space there and you don't need any extra space, and therefore the courtyard gets divided without deducting the 4 cubits. Mativ Rav Shesha brings a difficulty from the following source. Okay, the entrances to the houses and the entranceways to the achsadras, the porticos here, you get 4 cubits. So how can you explain that? We just said you don't. So Kitanya hi b'achsadra de Beit Rav. They say, oh no, that's the achsadra in the house of Rav. Some people explain was the Beit Midrash. And there, they didn't use it for unloading, like perhaps extra students sat there or something like that. It wasn't a space that was used for unloading, and therefore you get 4 cubits. To which they say, achsadra de Beit Rav pshita. That was an actual room, the achsadra in the house of Rav. That was where, again, if let's just assume it was the Beit Midrash and all the students were studying there, and of course that was a room. You wouldn't even need to tell us that you need 4 cubits in front of it because no one used it for unloading. To which they said, okay, fine, it's not the achsadra de Beit Rav, ela ba'achsadra romiyata. Okay, it's perhaps it means Roman. Okay, this achsadra romiyata, which Rashi explains had, again, different explanations, but had these low walls, Rashi says, that didn't get up to the ceiling. And then it was like it wasn't so clear that people would actually use this for unloading. And therefore they said, that's the case. They don't use it for unloading because it has walls all around, and therefore you can't just bring your animal into there. And therefore, it was, again, once also it's more protected space, then people use it for other things, and then there's no space for the animals to bring them in. Okay, the more it's covered, the more it's closed in, you might be using it for other things, which we'll get to soon also in another source. Tanu Rabbanan, another braita about this topic. Beit Shar, which was like a gatehouse outside there, like a little area where you would have a guard who would sit and watch. Achsadra, which is this portico. Umirpeset, and a mirpeset, which Rashi is going to explain it's a place where you have a ladder leading up to it. Yesh lahen arba amot, you get 4 amot around it. Again, this is depending on which kind of achsadra. Hayu chamisha, and the Beit Shar obviously was like a little mini house, and also there they would unload things. Hayu chamisha batim ptuchim lemerpeset, and if all 5 houses opened up to this merpeset, ein lahem ela arba amot bilvad, they only get 4 cubits for all of them, because the entranceway to get to this merpeset, which is leading to all their spaces, there's only one place leading to it, so there's only 4 cubits altogether for everybody. So we deduct 4 cubits and then divide it among the rest, everyone, the rest of the space. Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yana the following question: Lul shel tarnagolim, and we have a chicken coop. Yesh lo arba amot, do ein lo arba amot? Do you get 4 cubits in front of it or not? So So here they say the whole issue is to unload the stuff. Here, okay, so if you're putting chicks in and out, well, you don't unload them. They just jump in and jump out, and you don't need extra space for that. Some people say it's in terms of you bringing in stuff to them, like food, and they say you wouldn't unload that at all. You would just bring it straight in. Okay, again, you have to understand the reality of times to understand really what this is all about. But for whatever reason, they didn't need the space in front of a chicken coop. What if you have a house that's half covered and half not covered? Now, any space that's not covered, you're not going to really store anything there. And that would be a good space to allow your animals to unload. But if the space that's covered, you're not going to have space there. So what if it's half-half? Yesh lo arba'amot or ein lo arba'amot? Do you get 4 cubits? Or do we say, no, part of the house is uncovered, you can unload there? So amalei, ein lo arba'amot. You don't get 4 cubits, to which they say, and they explain even more. Lo mebaya ki lo milagav. We're not even talking about if it's covered on the inner part and the part that's close to the public domain is actually uncovered, where it's obvious. You can obviously bring your stuff into them. You're coming right from the outside and you immediately enter into this open area, which isn't full of other things. So obviously you can load your stuff there. But even if the covered part is near the street, you can still lead your animals through the house into the space, which is uncovered, and unload your stuff there. As long as you have space for unloading where it's uncovered, then we assume that you're going to unload there, and therefore you don't get any 4 cubits into the courtyard. Now we're going to move to a bit of a different topic about courtyards that open up into alleyways. Okay, so we're going to assume, and again, if you have a car and you can look there because they have a good photo, we have 5 houses, one, let's say, after another, and they all open up into a joint alley. And the alleyway leads into the public domain, okay? But the houses also back on another alleyway. So your courtyard in front of your house opens up into this alley, but you decide that instead of going into that alley, you want to have yours open on the one behind your house. Okay, you want to get out the other side, and you want to open your entrance area into that mavoy, that alley. And the people in that alley say, listen, you can't, your house doesn't open into ours. You can't just open your house into our courtyard because that's going to make more traffic and you're kind of taking over our space. You're taking away our courtyard from us because now you're going to be using the courtyard that we use, right? In the alleyway that's ours, it's not yours. So so he answered, yes, you really can. Okay, this was a question again. Rav Huna asked Rabbi Ami, and the answer is you can stop. Achsanya lefi bnei adam mitchaleket or lefi ptachim mitchaleket. Here's another question, and again, it's very, very hard to understand this question. Even the answer is even more difficult because the reality of their situation seems to be a little different. Now, when it came to, or we don't really understand it fully, we talked about having doorways. If you have 2 doorways, then you get more space because you're going to be unloading things into both spaces. Already, that raises a bit of a question, like it's a little unfair. Just because I have only 1 door, I get less space, right? And we had this whole machloket, even maybe I even get 2/3. I get space based on how many exits I have to my house. Like, why should that be exactly? So now we're going to talk about something else, which is even less realistic or hard to understand, I would say. If the king's people come along, there's like a fleet of soldiers that comes to town, and they basically were told by the king, you have to house them in your house. How do we divide them up? Okay, here's a very interesting question. According to Bnei Adam, like how many people live in the courtyard, which I believe means how many houses there are in the courtyard by house, or lafi ptachim, or how many entranceways I have in the house. So while it was good for me that I have more entranceways when it comes to, in terms of the space in the courtyard, but now we say, well, then basically you have to let more people into your house. Perhaps this was an indication of the size of the house, that a bigger house had more exits. Maybe that's why they would think that you would have to take more people in. And what's the answer? Okay, so now they say it's actually according to person. Okay, so actually that's not so surprising because it makes sense it's according to person. You would say, what's the difference if you have a house with 2 exits or a house with 1 exit? This next halacha, we're now going to say Tanya Nami Havi as a bright to support this answer. Then we're going to learn something else, which is a little bit strange, which is zevel shebachatzer mitchaleket lefi ptachim, achsanya lefi bnei adam. So the main part we brought this was for the achsanya, that when the king insists that you host people in your house, it all goes by household. But how many people you're going to have is based on, we divide up evenly among the households. But when it comes to the zevel, which is the fertilizer that people would take out their garbage, and then you would get as much fertilizer as you have entrances. Like if you had 2 entrances to your house or exits, you would get more fertilizer than the person who only have 1. Why that is, I don't really know. Again, it really somewhat depends on the reality of the way their houses were and what it meant to have 2 entrances. And again, it seems more similar to the courtyard and use of the courtyard that you're end up getting, especially if you say forget the space in front of it, but if you say you also get a bigger space of the courtyard, which was what Rav Huna said, right? It seems a little strange to us, but that would match this thing about the zevel as well. Amar Rav Huna, echami b'nei mavoy shebikesh listom neged pitcho, b'nei mavoy makvin alav shemar be'alehem etaderet. Okay, now we go back to this picture, and particularly in the Koran, if we have this strip where all 5 houses lead out to a common mavoy, an alleyway, but imagine they're in a long strip, and then there's a strip of mavoy, and each house kind of leads to that mavoy, and then the mavoy on one side, let's say near house number 1, okay, let's say it's house number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the side near house number 1, when you exit the mavoy, that's where you exit to the public domain. So now, according to Rav Huna, if any one of them wanted to close their exit, like their opening to the mavoy, that would basically increase traffic by the others, really, because then they can't leave through, there. And it would mean they have less exit, right? Less ways to get into the mavoy. Although, theoretically, if you're guy number 5, for example, and you close it, you're not really affecting anyone except you, because nobody's anyway getting to the mavoy through 5, because 5 is the farthest from the exit to the public domain in the way I described. Because if you remember, the entrance is, right, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses, and the mavoy opens from, right, the mavoy, which is basically in front of each house. It goes in a strip. So you come in from near house 1. So let's say the person living in house number 1 would never, ever exit the mavoy anyway near house number 5. But Rav Huna says, anyway, none of them are allowed to, because it's going to make them walk more. Okay, they won't be able to go out that way. They'll have to go further in the courtyard to get out to the mavoy. But then they bring a contradiction, and it says, okay, in this case, they were just talking about 2 people, okay? And they're basically, the case with 5 is really the next case that we're going to read right now. Either which way, though, we're talking about, we have a common mavoy, we have an exit from our house from our courtyard to the mavoy near our house. No one can close off their exit, because it basically means people can't use that door, okay, that exit entranceway. But right, they all use the outer ones, because the one in house number 1, as I described before, and the outer one really only uses, right, they use only their exit to the mavoy, because they wouldn't use house number 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1, because 2, 3, 4, 5, because it's out of their way. And all the inner ones use number 2. Number 2 uses their entrance and number 1's entrance. The inner one is the only one who uses the inner one, and then uses all the other entrances of the others. So it sounds like, according to this, if number 5 wanted to close off their exit, they could, because they're not affecting anyone other than themselves. So the answer to Nahi. This is actually a debate among Tanaim. So here it says that if one of them wanted to close off their entrance or exit, right, and move it into a different, right, they wanted to close off this one and open on the other side, right? So if I want to basically say, I don't want to go out this way, I want to go out the other way, so the other side can stop them from doing it. And but if, let's say, originally I was able to get out from the back of my house into that other mavui, but then it was closed up, then if I want to reopen that, I can reopen it, because it was never like it was closed, but it was closed kind of temporarily. I never gave up my rights to revert back to using it. Divrei Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Chamesh chatzerot haptuchot. Now that seemed not connected to us, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, like why they're bringing this, what does it have to do with anything? Rabbi Shimon, because remember, we're trying to find a machloket tanaim about when there's 5 people, can the 5th one, for example, which has no effect on anyone else, close the mavoy, and that's a machloket tanaim. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Chamesh chatzerot haptuchot lemavoy, kulam mishtamshot b'mavoy zo im zo. We have 5 people who all open up to one mavoy. Everyone shares commonly all the other parts. So the Gemara asks on this Braita, chatzerot, mantachar shmai. Where did you start coming up with chatzerot? We weren't talking about chatzerot here, right? We were talking about someone who wants to open to the other side. We're not talking about 5 people who are all sharing a common mavoi. To which they say, this bright is obviously missing words. וכן 5 חצרות הפתוחות למבוי, כולם משתמשות עם החיצונה, והחיצונה משתמשת לעצמה וכולי דברי רבי. And that matches one of the, right, the opinion that we saw before in the Braita, which is, right, number 5 actually can close it if they want because no one else is using it. Number 1 is going to have a problem because everybody uses number 1. But Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer, 5 חצרות הפתוחות למבוי, כולם משתמשות במבוי. Shimon ben Elazar matches the opinion that we saw before of Rav Huna, which is anyone can stop anyone in that courtyard from blocking it off, and therefore Rav Huna doesn't have a problem with the other Braita because Rav Huna could say, I hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Amar. Now we're going to go back to one line we saw in this before. If I had an exit through my backyard into the other mavoi and it was sealed up, and now I want to open it again, I'm allowed to. So they say, Amarava lo shanu ela shelo paratz et psima. This is only if I didn't take down the entranceway, what we call the mezuzah, which is the doorpost. If I didn't take apart the doorpost and I just kind of closed it up, that's clear that it's temporary. Aval parat et psima, if I totally got rid of the doorpost and turned it into a real full-fledged wall, then b'nei mavoi makvin alav, then they can stop me from doing it because they could say, you know, it was sealed entirely. We didn't ever think you were going to open it again, and therefore I'd have a problem. Okay, and then we're going to see Amar le'Abai l'Rava Tanya d'Masayala, and we'll get to that tomorrow, which is Abai brings a proof for Rava. Okay, so let's go through our daf quickly. We ended with the tzedakah issues. We saw Binyamin the Tzadik, who supported his family and how he got 22 extra years of his life back. We have Munbaz, who also gave charity, gave away all the treasures of his family to poor people when there was a need. And basically he tells his family why his kind of storing is a much better storage than they were doing of saving this for who knows what. Right? It's good. It's good. Sugya. I didn't really talk about this when we learned it, when I went through it before, but about, is there, you know, how much should you save and save and save and save, and, you know, you may never actually reap the benefits, or maybe your children won't. Like if we just keep saving, right? Well, what's that all for? Obviously we do think saving is important, so I have to balance that. And then we got back to this, the beit dira, like at what point, right? What do you have to buy in order to be considered a permanent inhabitant of the city? You have to start paying for things in the city. Then we talked about how to divide up different spaces and at what size or different spaces, a field, a garden, a bathhouse. At what point do we say that one can enforce the splitting on the other? And then we started in the Gemara with the this 4 cubits that you get in a courtyard. You deduct the entrance area, and then we had all different kinds of things which have entrance areas don't, because really the whole idea is you need an unloading space. If you have a different unloading space, then you don't really get the extra 4 cubits before you divide it. We talked about the doorways and what more do you get having 2 doorways, depending on the situation, right? Do you have to house more people in your house besides that maybe you'll get more in the division of the courtyard, but you also might have other responsibilities. In the end, we said not housing other people, but for the zevel, you would actually get more. You would get more fertilizer. It actually seems to be all siding on it's better for you to have more entrances into your house. And then we had this thing about the mavoi, about opening into the other side. And could you close part of your mavoi if it affects other people? What if it doesn't really affect the other people? Maybe still they could stop you from doing it. And with that, we kind of finished up our daf with this issue of that if you sealed it and then want to reopen it, under what conditions can you do that? With that, we'll wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and Shabbat Tov. We'll meet up on Sunday.